Peace, my people. You're tuning into I Must Be Bugging, where Black, gifted, and otherwise neurodivergent folks celebrate our special flavors. If you've ever questioned your perspective in a world built for the masses, welcome home. I'm your host, Sheldon Gay, and I appreciate you joining me on this journey as a late-identified Black, gifted man. Together, we'll rewrite the script on neurodiversity by celebrating our differences, challenging the status quo, and breaking free from old narratives that label us as deficient. In each episode, we'll explore the stories, experiences, and of course the curiosities of Black gifted adults and other neurodivergent people who are underrepresented or unidentified in a world where normal can also mean harmful. So continue with me on this journey of self-discovery, empowerment, and acceptance. I Must Be Bugging is creating safe spaces, sparking conversations, and making sure our voices are heard. Welcome to the latest episode of I Must Be Buggin'. This is your host, Sheldon Gay. I'm so excited to have you here. I just wanted to let you know that there's a little bit of audio trouble here in the beginning of the episode. We recorded this, several days ago, and then I noticed that initially, maybe about the first 25 minutes, my mic was having some issues. My guest mic was perfect. She sounded fantastic. So there's no issue there. Having said that, I didn't speak a whole lot at the beginning. And so that's a bonus for some. But I did want to make sure that I re-recorded the intro so that you can understand who she is and, hear her bio. So I'm going to, get us into that. But before I do that, I'm going to start the way that I have committed to doing, which is let me introduce myself in this way. I am Sheldon Gay, your host. I go by pronouns he and him. I am a 42-year-old Black man. I have what people would say light brown skin. My hair is faded on the side. I have sort of long hair on the top, not terribly long, but curly hair on top. It's black. I have a little bit of a goatee. I always joke this is, just about the most facial hair that I can grow, along with my mustache. Although I will say on the side, I'm starting to get a little hair there. But that is my description. So having said that, let me tell you a little bit about my guest, who I'm very excited for you to hear from. Her name is LaToya Hinton. She is a PhD. She has a PhD, and she's a mixed methods researcher, a data nerd, a Python programmer. She does diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and belonging thought leadership. And she's a champion for neurodivergent women leaders. She's a late diagnosed AuDHDer who is gifted, and she recently created a LinkedIn group, called Neurodivergent Women Leaders, Creative Mentorship and Support. LaToya serves as an advocate for creative content designers and ethical and responsible AI product development. LaToya also contributes content to DEIAB workshops and training programs for software product engineers and tech executives in the nonprofit space. Most recently, LaToya joined forces with the founders of ND Connect, a neurodivergent mentorship and social media platform to promote strengths-based approaches to help her peers navigate their multiple ND identities in career, home, and community environments. And I am super excited for you to hear this, as I was on the day that we originally recorded this. So again, you will hear some distortion on my mic. It may be a little bit hard for you to hear me ask questions, but please just bear with me. And after about, like I said, 20 to 25 minutes, you'll get in there and you will hear me perfectly. So enjoy the episode. And with that, LaToya, I'm glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Sheldon. So I'll introduce myself as well in a similar way that you did. I'm wearing a white shirt. I've got some round frame glasses that are a light brown color. I have light brown skin, hazel eyes, and I've got curly hair, but it's pulled back into a bun. I go by the pronouns she and her, and I'm just excited to be here.
Yeah, no, I'm again. This is you and I have talked before and really connected. I mean, we've got a lot of parallels with being late identified and just so many different levels. The tech piece, just so much. So I'm really excited about this conversation. So let's just start out kind of at the basics, right? So tell me about yourself, your work, and whether or not you. I mean, I guess we already kind of know the answer. But tell me whether or not you identify as neurodivergent and kind of what that means.
Sure. So, um, I would describe myself as kind of like a chill, like laid back Californian, super progressive, but focused on healing and renewal for BIPOC folks. I am an academic, an educator, data analyst, as you mentioned, lead UX researcher, designer, artist, content creator, responsible and ethical AI enthusiast. Um, and then, yeah, super late diagnosed AuDHDer. I'd also include in there dyscalculia and dyspraxia. Um, it's super interesting. I'm really excited to kind of get into how I started to sort of like investigate and figure out like how, some of these neurodivergent labels, how I identify with them in some ways. It's super interesting to kind of be enlightened later in life about neurodivergence. I definitely identify as gifted, and definitely from a young age. I was never screened for being gifted, but I really was a strong self advocate, for making sure that I received, gifted coursework in my education. And you can kind of tell, like, I'm a dabbler. I'm super creative and just into a lot of different things. And so there's a lot there that kind of highlights the gifted experience in a lot of ways. I'm just super curious. I feel like I'm always an adventurer. I'm just always trying to learn the next thing.
Yeah. No. Again, we could just stay here and focus the entire podcast on this because um, there is, and I want to talk a little bit about what it's like for you to kind of be late, identified because I think there is a different experience, that you know, and I think for me one of the things that I think about as well is there are folks our age and certainly like older, like my 10, 20, whatever years, who they are living with this experience but don't know. And
Right.
knowing what that process of identification is, like sometimes I wonder, like, is it worth it for them? Because for some people, it could be life changing in a good way, and for some people, it could be really challenging. And so I don't know if you had maybe if you have any thoughts about you know tell us a little bit about what you like. So your identification, kind of how you came to it, but then if you had any thoughts about um, I'm just thinking about the Matrix all of a sudden. As they said, there's certain like after a certain age or whatever, like we just don't hold people out.
Right.
So you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, you mentioned the Matrix, and I was thinking about like the red or the blue pill, and like whether you want to go down the route of identifying with different forms of neurodivergence or not. Like, will it benefit you or will it impede you if you're at a certain age? I think that is a really interesting question. I just personally think that like the more knowledge you have, the better, because it's about self discovery, and I think like the more resources you have available to you, the better. And resources look very different. I think you could just have access to a community of people who have similar experiences, and that is a huge, huge resource um, on its own. So um, I'm always kind of a little bit more like, I think it's best to know rather than to not know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I definitely, I'd rather know than not know personally, right? I, have had a lot of things in the last year that, have made me much more aware of myself. And some of that has been, a lot of that, honestly, has been very personally challenging. But knowing these things as opposed to, um, living with the lack of knowledge of them, for another 10, 20 years, right? And I'm so much more aware of the weight that was on me because I didn't kind of know what I was working with. So again, that's how I'm in agreement with you for myself, right? I know that there are some people, I've seen them. Um, I just think about, not that it's necessarily equivalent, but I think about some of the stories that I hear when people find out they got a sibling, they're like 60 years old, and all of a sudden it's like it throws into question everything that they thought just about their family structure, their parents, their, who am I, like all these different things. And um, I know, again, I guess what I'm saying is I leave that up to the individual, but I'm certainly, for me, my choice for me is exactly aligned with what you shared. Um, so tell us about, again, how you said that you kind of have always kind of identified with the gifted experience, but like, tell us about uh, coming to identify or being diagnosed as an adult.
Right. Um, I think there were a lot of aha moments. And I would say one of the things that kind of started to tip me off in a big way um, was that I was having these emotional meltdowns from really toxic social demands, like when I was in graduate school and in the workplace. Um, I really, until very, very recently, um, didn't have very much work life balance. And I didn't really have, until like very, very recently, I didn't really have a whole lot of safe spaces to kind of talk about mental health. Like, especially in my early years in the workplace. I think I had my first like real job when I was 18. And I'm 36 now. So it was like 18 years ago. Like, it's wild to think about that. It makes me
Yeah.
feel old. but but yeah, during that time, I just didn't feel like I could talk to my peers or mentors, any kind of manager that I had about anything like that. The work life balance stuff and mental health. And I think my last couple of roles, I just sort of had this like, wow, I'm seeing this pattern of like whenever I see like a company putting like their needs over the well-being of individuals working there, there's just something really unsustainable about that. And I think that just really should change in terms of just like work culture in general. And I think I'm just a super sensitive person to even like point that out and be worried about that. But I just really don't like when people are taking advantage of other people, and I feel it like in a visceral way. Injustice for and like the well-being of other people just kind of really shakes me to my core when I just see, people just, struggling, having a hard time, and, not being able to speak out about it. And I'm just now really starting, instead of focusing solely on other people and their well-being, like I'm really starting to center like my own well-being at this point, and like also paying attention to that balance, right, of like caring for others but also caring for yourself, just really trying to understand like boundaries at this point in my life. But go ahead, go ahead. I was just gonna say that for me, I think just in the last couple of years, I'd say kind of like post pandemic, if we're even in a post pandemic right now. Um, Air quotes for sure on post, because there are a lot of people out there, yeah, still struggling with COVID. But I think kind of the aftermath of the stay at home order and all of the fluctuations of um, work modalities and all of the things that we had to do, balancing, our obligations with our family and friends, and like just managing this, disaster and trauma, just, I think, woke me up to the possibility that there's more going on with me. Um, and I think I didn't just think it's just the run of the mill reaction to, traumatic circumstances. I think for me, I was like, no, I think I need to do like a deeper dive and kind of understand like where did, my original issues with like anxiety and depression, like where did those start? What was like the root cause of those things? And for a lot of us who are neurodivergent, we've got to go like all the way back to our childhood. A lot of the time it's it goes all the way back. And for me, I kind of can remember I had a best friend, and when she moved away to Chicago, um, that was my moment, I think, where my parents were like, oh, we need an intervention. And you can imagine, like most, you know, kids in third grade or something like that, I may have been a little bit older, but I remember we kind of like started to really be close friends at that stage. So maybe by the time I was in sixth grade or so, maybe around 11 or 12 was when she moved. We'd only been friends for a short period of time, but I felt like this person knew me really well and I could be my authentic self. And because I had such a strong bond, that it just sent me into like this spiral. And my dad had to like, he bought me a bird. And I remember like that was super therapeutic. It was like such a cool thing to do. Buy your child a pet, but he didn't have that concept of like, oh wow, like, like maybe I should bring, my daughter to therapy or something. Like he was just sort of like, maybe this is a stage that she's going through. Like everybody, has a hard time with, friendships, and she's young and I'm sure she's just trying to figure it out. I'm sure she'll grow. I think parents kind of have that idea, but that was sort of the first signs for me that, it was something where I didn't, want to come out of my room. And I, after school every day, I would kind of go to my room and cry by myself, like it was a really extreme like scenario. So, and then I started talking to, school counselors about anxiety and about depression. And a lot of them were kind of like, just get involved in sports. If you do exercise, like that'll make you feel better. And, I didn't have the vocabulary to say like, I'm not super coordinated to do a whole lot of sports, and I remember I did in high school, like I was in color guard, and I really loved it because there's like, like flags and rifles and like stuff flying around. And I was like, yeah, this is a lot of fun. There was dance was involved in it. But I remember getting to like the second year and we're practicing with rifles. and a lot, and I just, the balance was really hard for me. And I remember I was already in my first year, I was kind of running into people when I would dance. And I just had a hard time with like the spatial understanding. Um, and so it's just kind of like hard to explain all of these things are going on. And adults are a little bit like thinking, you're just going through stages, or you're just in, an awkward maybe period in your life. And these things will like, smooth over as you get older, maybe when you mature. but just looking back on that kind of stuff from like age 36, that like these are things that I'm still dealing with now. It's like I had to teach myself how to ride a bike, and I was like in my 20s by the time I like got it to work really well. And then like I can drive, but I feel like my reaction time is a little bit slower. And so I feel like self-conscious about it. But I've had like tons of driving lessons, and people have kind of like walked me through things step by step, and I've had to be really patient with myself. So I think it's just one of those things of like, rather than being ashamed of like not going through certain rites of passage, because I think that's a thing too. Like, people usually learn to ride a bike or learn to swim at a young age, and then maybe in their teenage years they get through the process of learning how to drive a car. And so it's like to kind of point these things out, that like it's not these things that are simple are not the easiest for everybody, is something
Yeah,
that just
no,
needs to be talked about more, for sure.
yeah, no, thank you. I think, yeah, you said so many great things, because it really is about kind of thinking about reflecting on the experiences. And I tell people now that looking back, I have basically two memories of like every event now, right? It's the initial thing that I thought. So like when I listen to you talk, right, you're talking about, okay, um, your friend left, and initially it just was about, okay, my friend left, and maybe that was just a thing.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, the second memory, right, now as you reflect back, it's like, well, were those feelings deeper because I, have depth and complexity around my emotions,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's both of those memories together, um, and thinking about even coordination, right? Like not every kid's going to be coordinated, and some people figure it out, and then there are some people who don't figure it out, and then
Mm-hmm.
you know what how does that relate to other things that I'm dealing with in my life? And I guess this is bringing me to my question about like at what point did you feel like as you're kind of pulling all the threads together that you kind of put the stake in the ground and said, I am, I'll just use neurodivergence as a catch-all for all
Yeah.
any or all of the things that you identify with.
um I think I I think I was always a really high achiever. And so I felt like I should be able to do everything. I kind of had that sense of,
Right.
and now when I think about it, it's like, wow, why did you think you had to be a superhero, But I think I just had that sense of like, if I could be good in one thing and like just set an example and be a role model for other people, then I'm sure I can do that in everything. And so I would always kind of push myself. And I would, like I said, I was really self motivated. I kind of early on, I felt like I knew who I was. I had a lot of self confidence. I didn't really want to be like a lot of other people around me. I didn't want to keep up with trends. I kind of felt like I was a trendsetter. And when I would talk about that kind of stuff with my parents, they were super supportive. They loved it. They felt like I was like the model daughter because I was so low maintenance. Like they didn't have to do much intervention. I was just kind of like doing things on my own, and I was telling them what I, you know, what I was about. I was an open book, you know, and so I think for them, they felt like they could trust me, um, and I was just, I guess I had sort of like that model behavior that they were looking for. My parents were pretty strict. They,
Mm.
um, you know, didn't they wanted me to always like sort of check in with them. I couldn't just be like out all hours of the night with friends in high school. They were that kind of strict, but also in terms of like politeness, you know, like when you're around people who are older than you had to show a certain amount of respect. There was clear boundaries between like being in a child's place and
Mm-hmm.
you know, an adult's place. So I think for me, just kind of growing up in that environment, I think I wanted to make my parents proud of me. So I think there was that sort of motivation. But I also sometimes felt like afraid to talk about certain things, like sensitivities, for instance. Like I remember really hating some of the stuff that my mom would cook because of
Mm-hmm.
like texture issues and stuff, but I couldn't say those things because if I
Right.
did, like that would be seen as like disrespect, right? So
Absolutely.
I had to kind of keep some of my experiences to myself, and I think that's one of the reasons why sometimes folks don't get screened if they are not super boisterous
Mm-hmm.
about,
Mm-hmm.
you know, having, you know, issues with things on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's part of why the late diagnoses kind of happen for sort of a certain profile of
Right.
individual, like somebody who, you know, is kind of a rule follower
Yeah.
and you know, is sort of reserved and kind of, you know, going with the flow of what expectations are. I think you could easily be left out. I talked to a ton of women on the autism spectrum and who have ADHD who say that I was a model student, so they just assumed like I was good
Right.
and
Right.
didn't ask
Yeah.
any questions, you know. So I think that's kind of part of it, is that if you can live up to your parents and your teachers and guidance counselors' expectations, then sometimes there's no alarm to kind of
Right.
like check in to see if you're struggling in certain areas.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what you described is really important. I mean, there's so many different layers that are really important, including, you know, this. I think what you spoke to just now was the fact that so much is framed around a deficit model, right? It's where it's like it we find labels for things that seem to be broken, and we kind of don't worry about the things that seem to be excelling. But you know, that's one of the reasons why I think it's so important to be focused on experiences, because when you talk about, okay, maybe I got an A in this class, but what was it like to get an A in that class, right? Like what did you have to do? How did you get to that point? And when you kind of dig in there, it's like, wait, there's something different here. And maybe it's a I didn't really have to study, or I can't I don't uh you know, it's hard for me to start until the last whatever day or two, right?
Mhm.
So again, you can bring in many different experiences, but when you hear those, all of a sudden you realize, wait a second, there's something different here. um you know, we need to kind of investigate this some more, particularly, you know, um for folks who just, again, don't fit the general models, because um, when you do have breakdowns, whether it be a friend leaving and maybe it feels like a little bit more intense, and you're like, is this because it's the first friend that left? You know, I
Yeah.
know that in my experience, there were many times where people kind of try to like brush stuff off, because I, you know, generally did well in school. I was somebody who, again, I didn't have to have a lot of like monitoring to kind of keep me in line. I definitely, especially as I was younger, was a rule follower. Some of
Right.
that was because, you know, just rules were structured or whatever, and I didn't mind, or sometimes I liked that, but also because I know for me, I was keenly aware, or at least at the very top of my subconscious, aware of what it meant to be a black boy in a lot of the spaces that I was in,
Right.
and the very fine line of like, you mess up, particularly because I went to, for example, schools that were like very nice, very expensive, but I know I wasn't there because we had the money, right? So it was one of those things. It was like they'll throw your black, behind out in 2 seconds, and I've seen that happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where some friends, they stepped out of line just a little bit, and all of a sudden they're trying to find ways to kind of, um, you know, if not kick them out, but certainly kind of put them in a box.
Right.
Where I saw a lot of other folks who, were given a lot more leeway, and so it made me keenly aware. It's like, Sheldon, like, you don't have a lot of leeway in these spaces. I was not, I did um, play soccer, and I was, pretty good when I was younger, but that was like the one sport that I played. I wasn't as good as I was. Um, I wasn't necessarily so good that I was going to get a college scholarship. And so it
Mm-hmm.
was one of those things where it was like, okay, like, again, you're going to make the team, but I wasn't somebody that you could say, oh, they're going to keep you here because, you're the, you know, all state athlete or something like that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, um, anyway, I guess what I'm just speaking to is this thing around why some folks get missed, and
Right.
making sure that in all levels of organizations, even the professional organizations, um, that we are not just looking for the employees that are quote unquote obviously struggling, right? But
Right.
we look for other ways in which people are demonstrating that they could use some extra support. And
Right.
so, yeah, go ahead. I was going to say, I know
And
that
I
you're
would,
doing some of that work. Go ahead.
yeah, and I would just say like before they get to burnout,
Exactly.
like the
Exactly.
signs of how to reach out to folks in a way that is not demeaning or disempowering,
Mm-hmm.
but allows them to know that they're in a safe space to be able to talk about maybe some of the things that are going on, maybe like outside of the workplace,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
often we compartmentalize. I know that when I'm in work environments, they're very structured, or I look for work environments that have a lot of
Right.
structure.
Right.
And so I feel like I'm my best self when I'm at work. But then when I'm at home, like sometimes I'm struggling with things with not as
Yeah.
much structure, or it's on me. The onus is on me to
Mm-hmm.
create more structure for myself outside of work. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that kind of understanding that people are balancing like their selves inside of work and outside of work, that's a good space. That's a great kind of safe space to
Mm-hmm.
let people kind of open up a little bit. And I realize boundaries are important. People are not going to want to disclose everything that's going on in their personal
Right.
lives,
Right.
but I think that there is, when you're getting to know your team members and you're getting to know like your supervisor, your manager, it's great to be like assertive and talk about what makes you thrive, like
Mm-hmm.
what really helps you to be like your best self at work.
Right. Um, and I have, some thoughts on that, but since I have an expert, or in the room, let me ask you a little bit more about your DEIAB work. Tell us a little bit more about that and why you think it's so important.
So one of the things that I've done with that work is I kind of started out when I was doing my PhD in education. I was a lot
Mm-hmm.
more like in the multilingual, multicultural education. I studied a lot of indigenous education.
Mm.
So the
Mm-hmm.
decolonizing, um, methodologies, all of that kind of stuff I delved into. Accessibility, I didn't really get too deep into accessibility until I was an instructional designer and we were building coursework for folks. And then all of a sudden that was at the center,
Right.
like you have to really make sure that websites are accessible and, all the multimedia that you use. But I have been kind of learning about multimedia design and like multimodality in education for a long time. So that kind of helped me to realize that different modalities help folks to communicate better. And so particularly, I'll give an example. For me, I really thrive with lots of visuals. So for instance, when I'm learning mathematical concepts, I really love to see like lots of charts. I like to see like diagrams, just anything where I can visualize what's going on. And then I can do a lot of reasoning that way. And there are other people, who are a little bit more like, I just kind of want detailed text that will be able to explain to me, what a problem is, and I'll just reason through that. And then other people, maybe they want someone to like walk them through, by telling them a story, and they're listening to the story and all of the different factors, and then they're reasoning through what the next steps are there. So I kind of, for me, the accessibility piece, I started to really kind of understand that from an education point of view. But then now I realize it's kind of helpful for everything. So like when you're creating, content online, like try to, use as many modalities as possible to reach out to different, communication repertoires. And I think, I would say intersectionality is really, really huge because I learned a lot about, like, I'll give the example of, this is like a really big one, but nonverbal communication, making eye contact. I learned really early on when I was studying, Indigenous education, that in some Indigenous communities, it's not common to make eye contact. And so it's like kind of really interesting because lots of people on the autism spectrum talk about struggling with making eye contact, and folks with ADHD kind of talk about how their eye contact is not doesn't mirror the neurotypical population, and so it's really interesting when you start to bring culture into the situation, and then when you kind of start talking about like race as well, like when we were just touching on how your behavior really was curtailed and really kind of dependent on perceptions of folks around you, and like what how a Black young man should show up and how he should present himself in this academic world, and like so there's just a lot there. And so I think that just expectations, I used to talk a lot about how there are internal expectations and then there are external expectations, and there are also internal ways of identifying with whether it be gender, sexuality, culture, religion, versus what other people identify you with. So there is kind of this really interesting way to kind of look at what's being imposed upon you versus what you're choosing, what in terms of agency. So I always would kind of write about that. I wrote about it a little bit in my dissertation, but I think about it on a regular basis, like how much control do I really have in terms of how other people perceive me? And I think it's really fascinating because I used to really be able to pick up on a lot of patterns and social context when I was a child, and I was like really deep into it. Like I
Mm-hmm.
would say, I see a lot of these girls at school, and they're like, wearing makeup, and they're, wearing certain clothing, and they're, doing this and that, and I just don't want to be a part of it. And I kind of
Mm-hmm.
like had this sense of like, that's not me. Like I just, and that never really went away. Like I kind of was highly aware of what probably I was supposed to be doing at a certain stage in my
Mm-hmm.
life, and kind of what I was rejecting. And it was for everything, like when you think about, and I'll bring it back to, like the topic of race. Very early on, I started like wearing my natural hair,
Mm-hmm.
before, it was like the trendy thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I just like recognized I had this kind of moment where I was like, you know what? Like I think I just want to accept that this is the natural me. And
Mm-hmm.
it happened like when in my teenage years. And I remember going to a friend's house, and I told her, "Can you do like a natural hairstyle for me? Like, can you do
Mm-hmm.
some
Mm-hmm.
twists or some braids or do something for me?" And
Mm-hmm.
um it was like just one of those moments where, and this was, like in the early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't like a mainstream thing. And I remember going to this program around the same time. It was called En-ROADS, and they were like kind of teaching you how to present yourself in interviews.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
remember distinctly, clear as day, they had actually a set of photographs of what was professional hair and
Mm-hmm.
what was
Mm-hmm.
unprofessional. And they
Mm-hmm.
literally told us, like, these are the things that are acceptable for you in an interview, and these are the things that are not acceptable. And there
Yeah,
was tons of natural hairstyles in the unacceptable group.
absolutely. Yeah.
And I just remember feeling like, wow, and I was dressed up like in a suit. I had like a gray suit jacket and
Right.
pants, button up shirt, and I had
Right.
like my straight hair. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, this is what they want me to do when I become an adult.
Right.
I was like 16 or something at the time.
Right.
And I just felt overwhelmed by that. Like, you're putting me
Yeah.
into this box where I don't feel comfortable at all. And so I think it's like one of those things where I had epiphanies maybe a little bit earlier than some of my
Mm.
peers.
Yeah. No, I mean, again, so many great things, and it can lead us into another question that I have, but I wanted to just stop here for a second and just talk about that because, yeah, one of the biggest challenges um, is this dichotomy between, you know, who am I, how do I see myself, and then how does that, you know, identity interface with the world. And I know that has been a challenge for me for the longest. As much as I kind of try to like button up and um, I am a pretty adaptable type of person, but going back to what I said earlier, like being where I am now, I realized again how much weight I was carrying, right? Like how much I was twisting and turning
Right.
and boxing myself in to be acceptable. And I've kind of very much so let go of a lot of those things, because I just saw how much joy it did bring me. I know that it does still limit me, and I have plenty of stories that I could tell about how me throughout the years, like living in my authenticity limited my opportunities. And
Yes.
to this day, I don't have regrets about that. Obviously, my bank account might be kind of like in my ear about it, but my heart, most importantly, my heart and my mind aren't. My heart and my mind are thanking me because I can reflect back and say, you know what, like, you know, as they say now, right? Like you stood on business, right? And that was just what it was. But um, it also reminded me, as you were talking, it reminded me about one of my favorite classes of undergrad where I got a mechanical engineering degree. And I only mention that because somebody might think that I'm about to say, whatever, some sort of like statics class or thermodynamics or something like that. But one of my favorite classes was this class called deviant behavior. And it was the first time in a school that I learned, like, it started to make sense to me. Like, somebody spoke to this experience of, when you, for example, you talked about in some indigenous cultures, eye contact is not, common or preferred, right? And that's something where a lot of people in their individual culture may think, oh, well, this is like, there are things that people don't even question that are absolutes. Like this whole idea of eye contact being the way to demonstrate respect or demonstrate confidence or whatever. And it's like, well, where did you get that idea from? And when you start to deconstruct that, you start to realize, well, then why are we, this doesn't mean what you all think it means. And the only reason why this is valued is because of some system that is not inclusive. And so, again, I've always been that person, like, who has been like, raised, like, I don't think this makes any sense. Like, why are we doing this? And people are like, shut up, Sheldon. Like, just do what everybody else is doing. And I'm like, I don't know. But again, I think, this whole discussion is so important because, I love the whole topic of decolonization and just really, again, being so much more aware and being able to make a choice. I think that's the biggest thing. Like, kind of what I was alluding to earlier. It's like, if you do want to straighten your hair, if you do want to, there's no judgment upon that decision, but kind of understand your decision and understand that that is your decision. I don't have to wear my hair like that. I don't have to, use my anglicized name, like all these different kinds of things if I choose not to. So, again, I was saying, like, this is a good segue then to talk about, what do you think are some of the common challenges that neurodivergent women in leadership experience? And, like, what do you wish was different?
Yeah.
So, sorry to leave you with a little bit of a cliffhanger, but I decided to split this episode up into two. LaToya and I got into a lot of stuff, as you can see. But I wanted to make sure that each section got its own opportunity to be savored. And so come back here in a few days. I'll have the second episode posted for you. Let me know, what do you like about this episode? Let me know if there's anything interesting. Hopefully this is, again, keeping you kind of on your toes about what we're going to share next. But yeah, come back in a couple of days. I'll have you taken care of. All right. Thank you for joining me on this episode of I Must Be Buggin'. Thank you for joining me for another episode of I Must Be Buggin'. I hope you've learned something, became curious, and most importantly, felt affirmed by what you heard. Remember, this podcast is all about sharing compassionate narratives about who we are and how we contribute to the beautiful and necessary diversity of humanity. This is our place to unmask and just be. Don't forget to connect with me on IG at I Must Be Buggin', where I'm eager to see you share your thoughts, your experiences, and your stories. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend. Leave a review and subscribe. It helps others who are eager for community find our people. So thank you again for being a part of the I Must Be Buggin' community. I can't wait for the next episode. Until then, stay up and enjoy who you were meant to be. And remember, you're not bugging, you're brilliant.